The Stone Dragon by R. Murray Gilchrist. Read by Connor Kay. Chapter 1. My father's account of his last visit to Furnival Castle, which I found in his journal some years after his death, enlightened me concerning the cause of his disagreement with my great-aunt Barbara. In response to an imperious summons, he had travelled hurriedly from the south of France to the remote corner of Westmoreland, where her estate lay. No sooner had he reached the portico than the old woman confronted him and began to discuss a new plan for restoring his shrunken fortunes by a marriage compact between myself and one of her great nieces, either Rachel or Mary, both of whom were children in the house. I was 15 years old then, Rachel 13, and Mary 10. The ceremony was to take place at once, and I was to travel for some years before claiming my child wife. My father refused indignantly. Scarce had his decisive words been spoken ere Lady Barbara turned away angrily. "Fool! Is there no changing you?" she cried. He understood her peculiarities, and despite his acknowledgment that she was a gross and materialistic woman who held no views beyond this world, and whose chief enjoyment was to interfere mischievously with the affairs of other folk, his kinship made him treat her with respect. "None," he replied. "My boy shall not be forced into bondage before he knows what love means. I would rather he begged for his bread than wronged body and soul." She swung round and showed a menacing face. "You have refused what I had set my heart on." Her voice softened. "'Tis for the love I bear you, Alston. I want to help you. Remember that I am your mother's sister. Don't refuse me." "Aunt," he said painfully, "it may not be. I cannot sin against my son." She came still nearer. "Well, so be it," she muttered in his ear. "Others will suffer for your obstinacy. I know what my project meant. But you, with your blind gropings after light, will never see. Nay, you come no further into my house. This is no place for you." The door was closed violently, and my father passed along the dark avenues to the village. He was with me in 2 days, but although I pressed him often, being curious to hear about Furnival, which I had never seen, he refused to disclose either the cause or the result of his visit. Before 2 years had passed, however, I found myself, by a curious trick of fortune, in the vicinity of Furnival Castle. I had suffered from an acute attack of brain fever, and when convalescent, had been ordered by the doctor to taste the air of Marlbrook over Sands, a quaint watering place at the mouth of the Lambert estuary. My father was engaged at the time in preparing for the press of his volume of philosophical discussions, and, although he would willingly have accompanied me, I chose rather to take Jeffreys, a man who had been his valet in former times, but who now held the posts of confidant, secretary, and checker of the domestic accounts, a faithful old servant of a type unknown to the present generation. At first my father was adverse to my visiting Marlbrook. He had suggested Nice or Mentone, fancying that the bustle of foreign life would act as a tonic, but as he heard of the marvellous strengthening virtues which, according to Dr. Pulteney, belonged to the Lambert water, he consented, and after strictly enjoining me not to go within at least a mile of Furnival, travelled with me, and left me with Jeffreys at an ancient inn. On the 4th evening of my stay, I strolled with Jeffreys to a large house whose seaward side is perfectly precipitous, but which is easily climbed landward by a winding sheep path. When I had reached the summit, I threw myself on the grass and rested for a while, gazing at the misty outline of man. Then, when my dimmed eyes had cleared, I turned and saw on the side of a far distant inland hill an enormous building, which at first sight appeared on fire, for the westering sun struck full on the great square windows. A grove of majestic trees gloomed to the left, and a park, besprinkled with herds of deer, sloped downward to the furthermost recess of the estuary. A shepherd was training a dog near the place where I sat. Regardless of Geoffrey's deprecations, I called to him and inquired the name of the house. "Furnival Castle, young sir. Lady Barbara Velrest's place," he replied. "What?" I cried. "Tell me about it. Have you ever been there? What is it like?" But before he could answer, Jeffreys interposed. "Come, Master Ralph, it is growing chill. We shall have Dr. Pulteney here, if you take cold." But I took no heed of him, and despite his attempted hindrance, obtained all the necessary information concerning the way. An evil desire to disobey my father filled me. It seemed as if the glamour of the house had cast a spell over me, and as I was hurried away by Jeffreys, I resolved to take advantage of him in the early morning, and to visit Lady Barbara. I slept little that night, but lay watching the dawn creep over the sea, and listening to the plaintive chirping of birds. As the cracked bell of Marlbrook St. Mary's struck 6, I sprang from my bed, dressed hurriedly, and after a quiet laugh at the thought of what Geoffrey's consternation would be when he discovered my absence, I slipped from the house and followed the path the shepherd had described. It led through a long wood of small trees, matted with bracken and sedge, and crossed by many rivulets that ran down to the sea. There was much honeysuckle, so sweet that life grew almost perfect. I gathered a large bunch, wherein lay many bees, and chanting extempore rhymes, I hurried onward. When I reached the terrace of Furnival, it was nearly breakfast time. The hall door, half open, revealed a vista of ancient pictures. As I knocked there timidly, an ancient serving man in fawn livery appeared. Something, perhaps my resemblance to my father, amazed him, and he bade me enter at once. "I wish to see Lady Barbara Velrest," I said. He ushered me into a small, white-panelled room. "Her ladyship will be with you very soon," he replied. Meanwhile, I arranged the honeysuckle in a large china dish. As I was doing this, a slight noise disturbed me, and looking up, I saw a white-frocked little girl eyeing me very intently. A black Persian cat lay in her arms, rubbing its head on her shoulder. "Cousin Mary!" I cried. The child dropped the cat and ran forward to bring her tiny mouth to mine, but even as she kissed, footsteps came, and she drew back, alarmed. I took the honeysuckle and flung it all into her apron, and she, as if fearing to be seen, made for another door and disappeared. Then Lady Barbara entered. There was nothing of the patrician in her appearance. Clad in a plain brown dress with a narrow collar of lace, she might well have passed for a housekeeper who had no liking for bright colour. Her face was round and russet, with a broad, low forehead that was covered with an intricate network of wrinkles. Her eyes were small and sherry-coloured, and her teeth, which, as I heard afterwards, were natural, glistened like regular pieces of ivory. Altogether, she struck me as a sharp, bargain-driving countrywoman with a good deal of craft and an underlying vein of sarcastic humour. As she saw me, she curtsied, very low. "So you are Ralph, or Rafe, as I love best to say it," she said. "Well, you are welcome here, though your father and I got across at our last meeting, but I suppose he has thought better of my proposal and sent you now." Here she looked at her watch, a massive gold and crystal globe that swung from her girdle. "The girl is a long time," she exclaimed. Before I could open my mouth to declare the truth about my father, a rustling of silks came, and a girl swept through the doorway. She was about 15 years old, but might well have passed for 20. Tall and slender in figure, and with a face so perfectly, so strangely lovely, it compelled me to make a simile of a flame resolving at the lambent crest into a star. She moved towards me, and with no assumption of modesty, threw her arms around my neck and kissed me. I have no idea how she was dressed, but as I write comes a recollection of the flower called Crown Imperial lying on a web of red golden hair. Lady Barbara shrieked in affected dismay. "My dear Rachel," she cried, "you are forgetting yourself. Rafe is not a little boy. He's 17. He's a man." Rachel Velrest turned to her, uplifting luminous eyes. "Oh, Aunt," she said, with a sigh of relief, "it is most delicious to see a man. I am Miranda, he Ferdinand. Cousin," mincingly, "you're the first man I've seen for 2 years, except, of course, the servants, and they don't count with such people as your lowly handmaid." Something about her, perhaps the fact that her manner was so opposed to that with which I had endowed my ideal woman, fascinated me at once. Never before had I seen such radiant beauty. Never before had I known a woman lay herself out so coquettishly to attract attention. She was unlike anything I had ever dreamed of, and even as I stood, I felt myself become enthralled. There was such admiration, too, in her glance, admiration of the most flattering kind. All suddenly, I sprang high in self-esteem. "A handsome couple," the old woman said pointedly. "One fair as day, the other, as Shakespeare says somewhere, black as night. Yes, night and day. Now pray let me see you walk together to the breakfast room. I will waive etiquette for once, and you shall take precedence. Yes, sir, your arm was given gracefully. I am quite satisfied with your manner. You are a Velrest, though your name is Eyre." With many comments upon the picture we made, she followed us to a small parlour hung with red velvet, embossed with earls' coronets in gilt. A light meal was spread. The aroma of coffee filled the air, and after the footman had brought in the hot dishes, a gust of fresher sweetness came as Mary, shyly bedecked with honeysuckle, entered and sat at my side. Lady Barbara took no heed of her appearance, so bent was she on her own plans. "So your father really conquered his prejudices," she remarked. "I knew all the time that they meant nothing. Poor Alston, he was always feather-brained, and I did not believe that he would have held out so long. Well, forgive and forget. It does my heart good to see you and Rachel at table together. I am almost inclined to sing Nunc Dimittis at once." Something in the exultancy of her voice suppressed my avowal that, overpowered by curiosity and attraction, I had come clandestinely. It was not from kindness that my tongue refused its office, but rather of a dread of how she might act. "Did he send any message, any writings?" she inquired sharply. I shook my head. "Ah, the rogue," she said. "He's proud of you. He knows that your presence is enough to explain all. Aye, and a very good recommendation to my favour. Alston had ever a little of the diplomatist. Again, let me assure you that nobody could be more welcome. So the meal passed. Often Rachel turned to me with proudly sweeping eyes and brought her face so near mine that I could see my reflection in each apple. For one so young, her wit was brilliant and sharp-edged, but the vivid outlines of her colouring prevented me from seeing anything unmaidenly in her demeanour. There was depth mingled with unstableness in her character, and although against my will I was allured, I could not help feeling a sort of oppression, as if the air were becoming too heavily perfumed. 2 centuries ago she might have shone as a king's mistress. When I looked at her sister, timid, frail, and shrinking, it was as if a draught of cool air rippled across my temples. Once the child essayed to speak. "Cousin Rafe," she said softly, "will you tell me after breakfast what the world is like? I don't mean the country of our little market towns, but those places that one reads about. Is Venice like Mrs. Radcliffe paints it in the Mysteries of Udolpho?" Lady Barbara began to laugh rather coarsely. "What is the girl raving about?" she said, turning contemptuously to Rachel. "Does she think that at my age I've nothing better to do than to listen to puerile descriptions? My dear Rafe, do not trouble with her. Rachel, I wonder you permit his attention to be distracted." Great tears rolled down Mary's cheeks. I was angered. "I like to hear her talk," I said chivalrously. At this my great-aunt laughed again, but Rachel, with wonderful tact, rose and embraced her sister. If she had not done so, I believe I should have hated her. Even Lady Barbara was pleased. "You are a good girl, Rachel," she said, patting her shoulder. "Now, Mary, you must forgive my querulousness." She took Rachel's hand and drew her from the table. As she reached the door, she paused. "Rafe," she said, "can you amuse yourself till noon? Rachel writes my letters and manages everything for me, so I must take her away. Mary, make your cousin stay here as pleasant as you can. Show him all over the house and gardens, or anywhere, so long as he is entertained. If you care to ride, order the ponies." But Mary, as soon as we were alone, led me to the open window. A flight of stairs descended from here to an old garden, where busts and urns surmounted columns of fluted marble. A spring, prattling over many-hued stones, crossed the middle of this and deepened into shallow pools that were edged with irises and flowering rushes. "Let us sit beside the dragon at the wellhead," she said. "It is my favorite dreaming place, and I will ask you all I want to know. I am not tiresome to you, Cousin Rafe," she added, with downcast eyes. Our spirits rose. Ere long I was chasing her up and down the maze, quite forgetful of the gravity of 17, and attempting at each corner to grasp her flying skirts, but ever failing intentionally out of compliment to her lightness of foot. Her paleness had quite disappeared, and as she laughed at me through the legs of the yew peacocks, she looked like a young nymph. She began to sing, hurriedly, in a silvery voice, in imitation of some gaffer. "When first I went a-wagoning did go. I filled my parents' hearts full of sorrow, grief and woe, and many are the hardships I ha' since gone through. So sing woe, my lads, sing woe, drive on, my lads, yo-ho, for ye canna drive a wagon where the horses wunna go." Every word came clear and distinct. Scarcely, however, had she begun the second verse than the sound of an approaching vehicle silenced her. We looked down the avenue, and beheld a trap drawn by a bony white horse. It drew up near us. A familiar voice accosted me. "Master Ralph!" To my surprise, it was old Jeffries, very haggard, and with eyes more sad than reproachful. "Oh, Master Ralph," he said, "come back at once, for God's sake. There's just enough time to catch the boat if you don't linger a moment. Word came this morning that my poor master was dying." His voice broke into sobs. Turning hastily to the child, who stood aghast at my side, I gave her one quick kiss and then sprang up to the seat, forgetful of all save the great catastrophe. Chapter 2. When I reached home, it was to find my father dead. Had I arrived an hour sooner, I should have the gratification of holding his hand in mine during the parting moments, and have heard his last words. But my act of disobedience had prevented this, and by my secret visit to Furnival, I had lost what would have been one of the dearest recollections of my life. He had died thinking of me, and as the last struggle began, had stammered out that I was to yield myself entirely to the written instructions contained in the secret drawer of his writing desk, and intended for my eyes alone. Therein, I found myself directed to spend the years intervening before my coming of age at a tiny estate in northern Italy. He had purchased it several months before his death, and having such use for it in view, had furnished the house comfortably and revived the faded glories of the library. Bound by a solemn command, I was to live retired from the world, and not to present myself at Furnival whilst Lady Barbara Velrest lived. The manuscript concluded mystically, "I have known that in your youth she will cross your path, an unscrupulous woman who cares for naught so long as her heart's desire is fulfilled. The stars declare it. Perhaps, even as I write, she may be weaving the fatal web that is to destroy life and happiness. But the line of fate runs on straightway. I cannot tell, for the evil destiny may overpower you, what to advise, but let justice and love ever sway you, and remember that earth's joy is naught in comparison with that which follows. Beware, Ralph, of her I write of, wherever she be." Overpowered with grief, my first impulse was a petulant and unreasonable fury against those with whom I had passed that delicious summer morning. So angry was I with the cause of my disobedience that I did not even write to Lady Barbara, and after my father's funeral, I started at once for the home he had chosen. Here, I passed 7 years of irresolute work. The management of the estate was entirely in my own hands, and I worked in a desultory fashion amongst my people, earning their affection, and being as happy as any man who has no aim in life. I had always my ideals and my recollections to think of, and I never felt a desire for stronger interests. At last came a time when all this ceased, and I became terribly depressed. Who can trust presentiments? I have had so many true and so many false, that I alternately believe and disbelieve in the supernatural powers in which foolish people place such absolute trust. We spend many hours in mourning over catastrophes that never occur, whilst at the time that the greatest possible disasters are affecting our fortunes, we are plunged into the lightest ecstasy. Yet I must confess that, when I received words from the Velrest's lawyer that on the opening of my great-aunt's will he had discovered a new codicil by which I was compelled to marry either Rachel or Mary, or to suffer the estates to pass entirely from our branch of the family. A long vista of ills opened before me, and I complained bitterly because of the craftiness and self-will of the old woman, who would not believe that aught but worldly interest was necessary for marriage. At first I determined not to go, but as the knowledge came that, unless I did so, my cousins would be plunged into poverty, I gave instructions for my trunk to be packed, and left everything in the hands of a steward. It was with considerable trepidation that I pondered over our meeting, and as I looked farewell on the gardens of my house, on the vineyards and the river, I execrated the memory of the old make-plot. In 4 days I was on the platform at Carl Rees Station, watching with a sort of amazement the train that had brought me disappear at the curve, and wondering whether the letter I had written from Dover had forewarned the ladies, when a withered groom advanced and touched his hat in antiquated style. "Be ye Mr. Rafe?" he said. "Why, God bless me, what am I saying? As if I couldn't tell him from his likeness to Mr. Alston." "Yes," I responded laughingly. "I am Rafe Eyre. You are from Furnival Castle?" He wore the old fawn livery, with pelicans wrought on the buttons, and a high white crepe stock was tied around his neck. "You are surely not Stephen, whom my father spoke of so often." "That I be," he cried. I remembered him perfectly now, from my father's description. In my boyhood, I had been told that he was at least 90, yet he was still straight as a staff. "Miss Rachel's waitin' outside in the carriage, sir," he said. "Train's nigh upon an hour late." With this gentle hint that his mistress might be growing impatient, he seized my luggage and led me to the gate, where stood a large green chariot. A woman's voice accosted me. "I bid you welcome, cousin." And before I could speak, I felt my hand taken and held. The sunlight was gleaming so fiercely that I could scarcely distinguish the features that smiled beneath the crown of red golden hair, but when I did, it was with a start of astonishment, for Rachel Velrest's beauty had become transcendent. She leaned back against the soft olive velvet cushions, and after insisting on my sitting at her side, she gave the order, and we were driven through the stretches of woodland and moor, and over the miles of park road that led to Furnival. Half bewildered, I continually turned to look at my companion. Strange to say, she did not wear mourning, but a gown of yellow tulle, worked in high relief with golden flowers, and the outline of her splendidly proportioned figure was visible through the gauzy folds. Whether it was that my arrival had excited her, or that it was her ordinary motion, I could not tell, but her heart was beating wildly beneath its coverings, and floods of a rich colour sped to and from her cheeks. Her bizarre conversation related much to the object of my visit. The peculiarity of the circumstances she took little heed of, and having at the first moment leaped into the familiarity of an old friend, she tacitly refused to vacate the position. "How delightful it is," she remarked as we passed through the Headless Cross Wood, "to meet a man who knows something of the outer world. Oh, the stupidity of our country gentlemen, whose noblest aspirations is to dine well, whose noblest possibility is to hide the mark of the ploughman and the lout. How definitely you refresh me, Rafe. Your presence here has already done me a world of good. If only you knew how stagnant, how wearisome life is. Bah, but you don't sympathize." This last observation was made because I had not replied, but to tell the truth, I did not wish my voice to break the musical echo hers had left in my ears. I expressed a hope that she would not regard me as laconic, but rather as overwhelmed by the gladness of reunion. Whilst I spoke, the turrets of Furneaux, just touched by the purple rays of the setting sun, gleamed above a cluster of gnarled elms. The mists from the sloping woods had ascended to the parapet of the roof, and given it the aspect of a terrace in the clouds. A gaily coloured flag fluttered in the giant's tower, and I could distinctly see the crest wrought in flagrant contradiction to the laws of blazonry. "'Twas I who did it," Rachel said, "in your honour. Mary wanted to embroider the pelican, but it was all my own idea, and I would not let her. However, she prevailed on me concerning the motto. See, you can just catch a glimpse of her, Nurit par son sang, in azure letters." The carriage stopped in front of the portico, and Stephen opened the door. My cousin laid her hand on my arm, and we entered the great hall together. As I paused to look up at the domed roof, with its pargeting of wyverns and cockle-shells, a feeling of chilliness made me shiver. "My dear Rafe," Rachel said, "the change of climate tries you. Had I imagined that the place would be so cold, I would have ordered a fire to be lighted. This is the way to the dining room. I wonder where my sister is. Ah, there you are, Mary." One dressed in the plainest of white muslins stood in an open doorway. She shrank visibly at the sight of my outstretched hand, and it was only by an effort that she placed her own in it, to lie there for too brief a space. Her figure was slight and insignificant, and she had not a feature worthy of comparison with her brilliant sisters. Rachel had taken away all the awkwardness of my involuntary visit. Mary had forced it back again, and I mentally accused her of inhospitality. Rachel, seeing that I was hurt, turned with the intention of diverting my thoughts. "Pray, do not change your clothes this evening," she said. "We are very unconventional here, and it is nearly dinner time. I will show you the state bedroom. It is at your disposal." So saying, she led me to an immense upper chamber, with a gilt bedstead hung with watchet blue. Grotesque lacquered cabinets lined the walls, and in each corner stood a dark green monster from Nankin. Here I made a few hasty alterations in my toilet, and after slipping a spray of honeysuckle from a bowl on the dressing table into my buttonhole, I hurried down to the drawing-room. Mary sat within, her knees covered by a long piece of lawn which she was embroidering. It fell to the floor, and she turned very pale as I entered. "Cousin Mary," I said reproachfully, "why do you treat me so coldly? Have I offended you?" Her eyes were slowly lifted to mine, and I beheld in them, despite her timidity, a look of the keenest pleasure. She held out her hand tentatively, and seemed relieved when I grasped it. "I am sorry that you should have misunderstood me," she murmured. "The anticipation of this meeting has been so painful. I am not as strong as Rachel, and anything disconcerts me." Rachel's entrance prevented any further remarks. She had taken advantage of the short time to doff her yellow gown for one of pale green gauze, of the same hue as the sea where the sunlight falls over shallows. A pair of fanciful worked gloves were fastened to her girdle. They were made of a claret-coloured, semi-transparent skin, with a laughing reminder of the ceremony we had used as boy and girl at our first meeting. She accompanied me to the table, where the meal passed in delicious interchange of thought, during which, although Mary neither spoke nor seemed to listen, I could well understand that she was appreciative. When I returned to the drawing-room, Rachel's look was mischievous. Mary had evidently been reproving her. "You shall judge me, Rafe," she cried, holding up her hands so that I might see what she had done. The gloves she had worn at her belt covered them now. They were awkwardly made, and on the back of each was worked a silk picture of a dagger and a vial. "They are tragic accompaniments," she said. "Mary has been scolding me for wearing them. She declares that they will bring me ill luck. Do you believe in such nonsense?" She did not wait for my reply, but continued. "They were made of the skin of a murderess gibbeted in these parts 120 years ago. Old Barnard Velrest insisted on having a piece. He wanted to cover a book with it, but his wife, whom tradition reports as a real she-devil, insisted on having these gloves made. Between ourselves, the result was that she poisoned her lord, but as she was very old, nobody was much the worse." And, mirthfully arching her mouth, she passed the gloves into my hand. A strong repugnance to touch them made me immediately drop them on a side table. Rachel's originality carried her into strange humours. I was not sorry when the lamps were brought. They were of a curious Venetian make, with round shades of silver lattice-work filled in with cubes of gold-coloured glass. Their soft and pleasant light enhanced Rachel's personal charm. She went on to the piano soon, and calling me to her side, began to play. Never had I heard such wild and fantastical music as the first three melodies. They were Russian, savage, rough airs, which fretted me to unhealthy excess of inquietude. After the third, by which the soul is wrought to such a pitch that it is hard to refrain from shrieking, she began a plaintive air with a grotesque rhythm. "This is the tune the gnomes dance to on the hillside," she said. "Here they emphasize the step. Now they float round and round in rings. Now the king is performing alone, and they are all watching. My favorite is that one with the white slashed doublet and crooked face, with a moustache so long that it pricks the others. Ah, well," with hands brought down dashingly, "they must all creep through the bronze door, so." Then, playing an unfamiliar melody, she began to sing Shelley's Love's Philosophy. I scarcely dare to attempt to describe her voice. Poets have dreamed of its likes. Heard them, I may swear, never. It was almost unearthly in its pathos, and tears were streaming from my eyes ere the first verse was ended. How she could sing so purely, I cannot tell, but it seemed as if to the accompaniment of music all the dross were purged from her spiritual nature, and an innocence left, unsullied as that of our first mother ere she sinned. As the song went on, a fuller harmony sustained her, and, looking around, I saw that Mary's hands swept delicately over the strings of a harp that stood in shadow. I leaned back, delivered to perfect delight, but just as my head pressed the cushion, a sob came from Rachel's lips, and rising hastily, she pressed her hands over her face and hurried from the room. Mary followed her, but returned almost immediately. "Cousin Rafe," she said nervously, "forget that Rachel has broken down. Her singing often overpowers her. She feels everything too acutely. She begs you pardon her absence for the rest of the evening. Recent events, my aunt's illness and sudden death among them, have unnerved her. You must remember what great store they set on each other." The revulsion was distressing. I had begun to regard Rachel as a woman of iron will, endowed with an intellect nothing could quail. This sign of weakness, coming so unexpectedly, surprised and pained me. Had I been more closely connected with her, I would have sought her chamber and drawn her head to my breast. As I sat, the moon began to rise over the further hills. The rays slanted into the Italian garden, where, 7 years before, Mary and I had played like young children. She had returned to her harp, and was drawing forth soft chords. The night, however, became so beautiful that I felt I must breathe the outer air. "Let us walk together," I said. "Show me the dragon and the maze where we ran, and the lilies and flowing rushes. The heat of the room oppresses me." She led me silently down the broad stone stairs. The dragon was unchanged. "We will sit here," she said, "and you can tell me everything that has happened in the last few years. I have nothing to give in return, for my life has been placid from the very beginning, and the only great excitement I ever had was when you visited Furnival before. Rachel says that I have a small soul. It must be so, for the quiet content of this place suits me well. I suppose that I am one of those weeds that root themselves firmly anywhere. Each thing about here I love as if it were a part of me. Now, forgive me for my tediousness, and tell me everything." Thus bidden, I began the story of how I spent the intervening time. There was little worth telling. It was a brief and simple record of dormant faculties and aspirations, when my highest desire had been for undisturbed sleep. Mary listened in silence, and when I had finished, looked up. "But the awakening has come now," she said very gently. "A new future is thrust upon you. Your life will no longer be as it was." Somehow, as she spoke, my head moved nearer hers, and before she could draw back, my lips had pressed her cheek. She rose, gasping. Then, turning on me a look of surprise and wonder, she hurried away. Perhaps some reminiscence of our former racing came to her, for I heard her laugh, light and long and silvery, as her gown glimmered through the yews. When I retired to my room, it was not to sleep. A conflict was raging in heart and brain. Rachel was undeniably the more beautiful. Indeed, she was by far the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and her wit and power of fascination were incomparably superior to Mary's. She evidently believed that I must choose her, and so I had fully intended to do, until a tone in Mary's voice and a quick responsive beating of my own heart told me that it could not be. Mary had never imagined that I should take her in preference, but I knew now that whatever love lay in my nature must be placed in her keeping. I had discovered that I wanted no mental stronghold to surround me, but a wife, tender, loving, and dependent. Uncertain whether a declaration would or not be premature, I decided to leave the castle early next morning and to reflect for at least a month on my decision. Rachel had acquired a strong influence over me, and I dared not venture to free myself from her bonds without tightening my armor. So, rising almost before daybreak, I set out in secret, from the village inn dispatching a short note. "My dear Rachel, do not attempt to fathom the motive which compels me to leave Furnival. Impute it, if you will, to flightiness. I was always fond of doing strange things. I shall return in a month today. Ralph Eyre." My meditating place was Northern Hall, a small manor house situated about 200 miles away. I had inherited it from my mother. It stands in a little park, outside an antiquated market town. I had installed Jeffries, my father's old friend, and he was living out the remainder of his years in ease and solitude. He was standing in the walled rose garden when I reached the place. Half his time since my father's death had been spent with me in Italy, but the climate had proven unsuited to him, and he had been compelled to return to England. The affection he greeted me with was very touching. Although I have always been very tiresome, I have no doubt that he loved me deeply. A suite of rooms had been kept in readiness for me, and I was soon made comfortable therein. I had much writing to do, and for some days worked hard, so that I might drive away the thought of my dilemma. But after a while, when I was idle again, the remembrance of Mary's timid loveliness haunted me from morning to night, and I began to long for the time of my return. The momentous day came at last. Rachel Velrest, like another Fiammetta, clad in a gown of dull dark green, with scarlet lilies at the neck, met me on the terrace. There was a slightly puzzled look in her eyes when I did not give her the warm greeting she evidently expected, but she slipped her arm into mine with as much graceful ease as if she were already my wife. There was no sign of Mary, and when I inquired for her, Rachel replied evasively, "Not until I went to the drawing-room after dinner did I see her. She was alone, sitting near a window, with a book in her hands." She gave a sudden start when she saw me. "Oh, Rafe!" she cried. "When did you come? I did not know you were here. Rachel would not tell me anything about you, either where you were or why you went, and I've only just come in from riding to watch the sunset." Before she had done speaking, I had clasped her in my arms and was showering kisses on her lips. "Mary," I whispered, "I have come back for you." She began to extricate herself, but before I had released her, the door opened, and Rachel herself entered. Chapter 3. She gave but little sign that she had seen the embrace. The bunch of white roses she held in her right hand were raised slowly, as if she wished to inhale their perfume, and beneath their shade her lips were convulsed for just one moment. Then, with even more than the old grace, she came near. Her skirt caught the gilded legs of a chair and drew it for a short distance, but she took no heed. She began to smile winningly. "Has Mary told you of the naughty trick I played?" she said. "I wanted to keep all the gratification to myself. It was so great a pleasure to know something of you that no one else knew. Of course I was selfish. Now, my cousin, as you gave her a guerdon for waiting so patiently, do not forget that I also waited. Not with patience, for I have chafed terribly, but still, every awakening has been fraught with the knowledge that a day nearer our meeting had come." And she held up her mouth, sweet and ruddy as the lilies on her breast. I kissed her. Seeing that I made no motion to encircle her with my arms as I had done to Mary, she clasped her hands at the back of my neck and again brought her lips to mine. "There is nothing wrong in my kissing you," she murmured inquiringly. "When women kiss, it is mere passionless duty and affection, but when I kiss you, oh, Rafe, 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 I cannot say it." I saw Mary's reflection in a mirror. She was standing, wan and wretched-looking, by the window. When she knew that I was watching her, she moved quietly from the room. Rachel laughed nervously as the door closed. "It is well to be alone, Rafe. I never thought that I should feel the presence of a third person such a restraint, but so it is. I cannot breathe freely with you unless I have you entirely to myself. Now, I wish to know what you have been doing away from me, or rather, for of course I do know all about it. I'm dying to hear the words you have to say to me." Not divining her meaning, I hesitated. "I do not understand you," I said. She laughed again, this time very sadly. Somehow I felt that she was murdering her scruples. She raised her fan and struck me lightly on the shoulder. "Dear Rafe," she said, "I know well that you are overcome with a kind of reluctance to declare yourself. Why then should we temporize? You have not known me for so short a time as not to see that I love you with my whole heart and soul." The last words came in a hoarse undertone, but then, with her flushed face downcast, she left me, turning once at the door to see if I followed. But, being almost petrified with amazement, I did not move. I had never thought sufficiently highly of myself as to believe that Rachel would really love me. I knew that she might marry me to retain the estates, but not for one instant had I imagined that I could stir her passion. The knowledge filled me with dread. Although she charmed, nay, almost magnetized me, my pulse beat none the quicker because of her presence, and I felt blinded with excess of light. A desire came for the soothing Mary's voice alone could give, and I too left the room. Old Stephen, stiff as the mailed figure in the hall, was pacing outside the door. His 80 years of service had given him the freedom of the house. He divined my intention. "Miss Mary is in the garden," he said. I went to the stone dragon, convinced that I should find her there. I was not deceived. She was sitting on the sward beside the monster, her head resting on his scaly back. At my approach, her face lighted up, and she rose to meet me. "Forgive me for being so weak," she murmured coyly. "I could not bear to see you kissing Rachel. I am foolishly jealous, and it followed so quickly after." "Dear Mary," I said, "let us forget it all. Tonight I would leave the precincts of the house. Let us walk together to the moor. There is a British camp somewhere near it. It will be just the place for a solemn vowing. Show me the way." She led me through the intricate maze to a door in a moss-covered wall, which opened on a barren path. This crossed a mile of park, and then reached a broad and hilly stretch of moorland. Here the track was sunken between gravelly banks. At some distance rose a mound, on whose top stood 3 cromlechs. When we stood against the largest, I took her right hand. "I, Ralph Eyre, swear solemnly that all my life shall be devoted to your happiness." Mary's voice, soft and trembling, followed. "I, Mary Vellerest, swear solemnly that all my life shall be devoted." A harsh cry interrupted her. Turning sharply, we saw Rachel herself, covered with a long grey cloak, whose hood had fallen back. How she had followed so silently, I never knew. It may have been that she had unwittingly chosen this as a night walk, but whether or no, her presence there was the work of some evil genius. She was haggard, and as the moonlight fell on her distorted face, I saw that her eyes had contracted so much as to be almost invisible. One hand was tearing the flowers from her throat, the other moved automatically in front. "Rafe," she muttered, "Rafe." Mary came closer and passed her arm around my waist. She was nearly fainting and required all my strength to support her, but I was impotent as a newborn child and could only grasp her elbow with nerveless fingers. "Is this the end?" Rachel asked. Her voice was dull and monotonous. "Answer me quickly. Do you know what a woman's heart is? Is this the end of all I've prayed for, this refusal of my passion?" I strove to speak. My teeth chattered. I am not an heroic woman, noble enough to wear the willow in peace and to pass my prime in the doing of good deeds. God forgive me, my nature is small, so small that I have consumed its virtue. If only my love would change to hatred, I could endure it better. With this, she moved rapidly away. Some minutes passed in silence. "Let us go in at once," Mary said. "I am afraid." We returned to the castle. As we reached the postern door, Rachel's grey figure rose before us again. Her attitude was threatening now, and her voice clear and loud. She thrust out both hands to show that she had donned the skin gloves. "Am I attired for tragedy?" she cried. "Or is it because of the devilry in my soul that I desire evil things about me? See, they fit better now. My fingers are swollen, with bitterness if you like." Nearer she came. Mary flung her arms around me, and despite my endeavours and entreaties that she should move, leaned closely on my breast. "She shall kill me first," she said quietly. "My body is yours." Rachel's eyes were flaming sullenly. "I am denied," she said. "Had you died before this moment, I should have been a maid all my life. Had you vowed celibacy, I would have loved you still, though the world lay between us. As it is—" With one powerful effort, I forced Mary aside and stood facing Rachel. "How can I control my affection?" I cried. "I had not the creating of it." She shook her head ominously. "Since you are lost to me as the completion of myself," she murmured, "let us remain unwed and choose poverty for the future. Who knows, but we may rise to greater riches and state. I will content myself with little, a pressure of the hand. Nay, to breathe the same air will be enough for me. Only give me your constancy. It is the thought that you will belong to another that hurts so cruelly now." Strung to the highest tension, I replied, "It cannot be." Rachel's hand toyed at her breast for an instant, then, making a sudden upward movement, curved in the air and came glittering towards my heart. A moan of horror was the only sound. Afterwards, something bore down at my feet, and a fountain of hot blood gushed over the grass. Mary had sprung before me and saved my life. Forgetful of all else, I knelt, and lifting her in my arms, carried her to the house. Rachel was no longer in sight. As soon as the blow had fallen, she fled. The bells rang from daybreak. It was a hot autumn morning, and the aftermath of honeysuckle was very rich. I had gathered great clusters for my bride, and was in my lightest humour. That morning I was to wed her, whom I had watched so long, winning her way back to health. Together we walked to the damp old church, she in her simplest gown, I in my ordinary clothes. Mary had ever a fond belief that her sister would return to forgive her for her guiltless sin, and she would not agree to our leaving Furnival for even one day. So we were married. No wedding party accompanied us. The clerk gave Mary away, and although money had been dispensed among the villagers, there was no merrymaking. A few girls cast roses on the path. That was all. Home we went. Old Stephen was standing at the door. A senile resentment was on his face. He looked as if he hated us. "She's come back," he said in a broken voice. "Poor lass, poor lass." Mary ran forward, her face glowing with joy. She had never harboured an ill feeling against her sister. "Where is she?" she asked. "Did you tell her, Stephen?" "No, Miss Mary, I didn't. She knew about it, though, I'll be bound. Perhaps Mr. Eyre had best go alone to find her." But my true love clasped my arm. "Let me come too," she said. "Stephen, tell us where she is." "She sought you at the old stone dragon, where ye were always a-sittin' in the old time. You'll find her there right now." The old man burst out sobbing as we hurried down the staircase. To me, there came a terrible fear, but Mary had a bride's blitheness. We reached the Italian garden. A travel-stained form lay beside the dragon. The face was buried in the thick wild thyme, but a bright web of red golden hair was spread over the lichened stone. Mary knelt and strove to turn her. "My darling," she said, "how much I've missed you. It was tender of you to come today. Though I love Rafe so, you were always most dear and wonderful to me." After much effort, she raised Rachel's head to her lap. The beautiful features had sharpened strangely, and the skin was ashen grey. "Oh my God! Oh Rafe!" my wife shrieked. "She is cold! She is dead!" Hello everyone, it's Connor here. So I'm back after the story. I'm going to do a bit of an analysis and also a little bit of an update about the channel in general. So you may have noticed two distinct things about the channel which have changed more recently. The first one is that I'm uploading more frequently than I have been in the past, and that's just simply because I have a bit more time and I wanted to try and increase the number of audiobooks I'm doing. I have a huge list of books that I want to do, and it's going to take me forever to get through them if I only do one audiobook a month. So I decided to speed it up a little bit. The second thing you might notice is that I used to do music for every single audiobook that I did, and I haven't been doing that recently. And the reason for that is very simple. It's because it takes me a little while to come up with new music, usually a couple of days, and I'm not always that happy with the result. So basically, it slows down the process of creating audiobooks and releasing them. So when I do an original bit of music for an audiobook, it usually adds like 3 or 4 days to the production time. So I thought what I'll do is I'll just put the audiobooks out there without music, and that'll speed up the production time a little bit. Okay, so that is the update out of the way. Let's get to the analysis of this story, because I found this story to be incredibly interesting for certain reasons that I will get into. But first, we need to discuss R. Murray Gilchrist, who is the author of this story. All right, so R. Murray Gilchrist was born in 1867 and he died in 1917, right? So he was, I believe that's the Edwardian period in England. R. Murray Gilchrist was really quite a prolific writer. He published 22 novels, which is pretty impressive. He also wrote a few guidebooks, which is pretty interesting, and you can find some of them online, because I had a quick squiz at a couple of these guidebooks. They're for the Peak District in England, which is not a region that I'm familiar with. He also published 6 short story collections. And really, it's his short story collections which have survived into the modern age, right? It's actually very difficult, apparently, to get a hold of any of his novels. Even though he wrote 22 of them, you have to go to a particular library where they have an edition of them because they haven't been republished. Luckily, though, R. Murray Gilchrist's short stories have been republished in a sort of best-of anthology. There are actually a few different ones of them, which you can find around the place. The one that I have, that I'm holding in my hands right now, is an anthology from the British Library, and it's from a series of books called Tales of the Weird. This particular book is called I Am Stone, and it was compiled and edited by Daniel Peterson, in case you want to look up the book. And I highly recommend you do look up the book as well as Daniel Peterson, because Daniel Peterson has a lecture on YouTube, which is all about R. Murray Gilchrist, and I highly recommend it because it was quite interesting. So Daniel Peterson also edited this book, and it's pretty fantastic. Not only does it have some really great artwork in the book, but it's really well put together, I gotta say, and it's a nice book. It smells great too. It's got that new book smell. I hope I'm not the only person who enjoys that. But it's great. There's a lot of good stuff in here. This story was one which, most people when they talk about R. Murray Gilchrist, if they do at all, they talk about a few of his more famous stories. So there's one called The Basilisk, I think, and also The Crimson Weaver. And there's one called, what's it called? The Return is what it's called, which is also quite good. But this story I thought was phenomenal. And that's because I really enjoy Gothic literature. I just, everything about it is great. And this story really has a touch of the weird to it. A lot of Gothic literature is always about the sublime and decadence and also the grotesque. So it naturally has this element of weirdness to it sometimes. But this story it had a few good aspects of weirdness, I will say. So let's get into analyzing the story then. And this is going to be really a sort of psychoanalysis rather than literary analysis. You could do literary analysis, but I think psychoanalysis is where we'll get most out of this story. It starts off like a very ordinary Gothic tale, I would say. So there's an estranged family, and they're all pretty rich, and there's sort of some mysterious backstory going on a little bit. Our main character is called Ralph, or Rafe, as his cousins call him. And he's a bit curious about this other branch of the family and his cousins who he knows of, but has been warned off meeting by his father. His father's like, they're no good, don't go near them. And we sort of find out why. The family, who are called the Velrests, we learn, consists of a few members. Mainly, Ralph's father is really wary of Aunt Barbara, and she's really the leader of the family. And she seems to be a little bit superficial and manipulative, so narcissistic, I would say. And then there are also Ralph's cousins, Rachel, who seems to be a bit of a golden child, and we also have Mary, who seems to be quite shy. And I will note, there is no father figure in the family. It's all women. And conversely, Ralph's family does not seem to have any women in it. It's just him and his father that we know of, right? So a bit of an interesting dynamic there. If we look closer at the Velrests' family dynamic, we see some worrying and weird things, right? So Barbara is very close with Rachel. Rachel is sort of like Barbara's right-hand man, so to speak. And Barbara is really dismissive of Mary and puts her down, which is probably why Mary is so shy, right? So the story really gets going when Barbara dies, right? And Barbara's really vindictive and manipulative. So she puts it in her will that unless one of her daughters marries Ralph, they will lose everything. They'll basically be beggared. They'll be on the street. They'll have no way to support themselves. And so, of course, she's forcing Ralph to make the decision that she wanted him to make, which is, of course, really unfair on Ralph and on her daughters, but she gets the last word in this family dispute. And so this is an important thing to note, that Barbara had to have the last word, even at the expense of her own daughters. All right, so the story kicks off when Ralph has to go back to the Velrest estate, and he basically has to pick one of his cousins to marry. So not a very enviable situation, I've got to say. This is where it starts to get weird, right? I mean weird in the sense of weird and eerie and a weird tale. Rachel is really the person in the story who is quite weird and has an eerie sense about her, right? She's a pretty odd duck. So she's very beautiful, we're told. Ralph thinks so, at least. But she seems to also be unhinged in a way that's sort of hard to put your finger on at first. We really see this in two main ways. The first way, which she's strange, is that she is very fond of a pair of gloves that she owns which are made from human skin. So that's very macabre and ghoulish and really unusual. Normally, you would not think of a young lady being interested in something like that. It's pretty gross. The second thing we see about Rachel, which is quite weird and unhinged, is when it comes to her playing music. So we have this scene where when Ralph goes back to meet them, and she plays music with Mary as well, but it's mainly her. And we're told that she's almost manic when she plays music, and she seems to be going into like some sort of a trance or a reverie almost. She starts to almost hallucinate, or at least vividly imagine scenes which to her, I suppose, are conjured forth from her music, right? So this is pretty weird, and I think it weirds Ralph out a little bit as well. And shortly after Rachel has these visions, she is overcome by emotion and has to leave and run away. But it's noted that she's an excellent musician and she has a beautiful voice. Ralph admits that, and he says, like, wow, he's so taken aback by what an incredible musician she is. So in comparison to Rachel, though, in this family, Rachel is beautiful and weird and unhinged, but we also have Mary, right? She's the flip side, and she is pretty shy and naive, and I would say fairly normal. She's just this average kind of young lady in a rich family. All right, let's go back to these human skin gloves, because in a weird way, they play a very important role in the story. Not literally, like they don't push the plot forward, but I think they're really important in terms of their symbolism. Okay, what is going on with these gloves? What we know is that they are made from the skin of a murderess, right? And Rachel's ancestor had them made. This murderess was gibbeted or hung, I think that is. And then her ancestor had the corpse, skinned and made gloves from her skin, which is incredibly gross and creepy. We're also told that this same ancestor poisoned her husband. It's interesting to note that Rachel comments that people basically knew about this but didn't really care. The reason that all this stuff is quite interesting is because of the symbolism. So these gloves are literally made from the skin of a murderess. And then they were owned originally by Rachel's ancestor, who was also a murderess and who presumably wore the gloves, right? So Rachel's ancestor would put on the skin of a murderer and then became a murderer, which is, there's a lot of, and there's an interesting theme there in doing that. And then Rachel inherits these gloves and is also fond of them. So what we're sort of told here is that people who put on these gloves or own them become murderers, I suppose, in a way. Rachel herself is wearing these gloves when she tries to murder Ralph and accidentally wounds her own sister. So this kind of begs a question, right? There's an unanswered question sitting in the story, which is, how did Rachel's mother die? Right? We know a little bit, but it occurs to me, I wonder if Rachel killed her own mother. There's a few reasons I think this. The first one is that Rachel owns these gloves, which we know are associated with murder and betrayal. A wife who owned them killed her husband, so Rachel owns them. She could have killed her mother. It's possible. Another point which I think hints towards Rachel maybe killing her mother is that Rachel is not wearing mourning when she meets Ralph, which is to say she's not wearing black clothes. And this is normally expected. I'm not an expert on Edwardian society or English culture, but usually I think when somebody dies, especially at this time, people wear mourning, They wear black clothes to represent that they are in mourning from a loved one who they've lost. But Rachel is not wearing them, which we can interpret to mean that she's not too sad that her mother has died. Now, against this theory, we also have Rachel's display of emotion when she's playing music, and Mary attributes Rachel's outburst of emotion to the grief over the loss of her mother. So maybe Rachel is in fact upset about her mother's death. We don't really know. So speaking of Barbara, right, I think it's important to discuss her personality because it's a reoccurring theme in this story. I think Barbara probably qualifies as having some narcissistic tendencies, right? She's very manipulative, which we can see where she basically strong arms Ralph into marrying one of her daughters. She's also very superficial. So Ralph's father says that Barbara thinks the only reason for marriage is either for power or wealth or to build a family legacy. It's never for genuine affection or love. It seems that Ralph's father is a bit of a romantic guy, or at least he is more open-minded than Barbara. So Rachel is Barbara's heir, in a way. She's obviously the preferred child. And Rachel herself also displays some narcissistic tendencies. So we see this in a few different places early on, and it becomes more apparent later. Rachel believes that Ralph will absolutely choose her. I don't think she conceived of the fact at all that Ralph might choose Mary to marry over her, and probably because Rachel's the more attractive maybe, and she just believes she's more charming, and she probably thinks, here's Mary, this sort of like church mouse kind of character who is not sure of herself. There's no way Ralph would choose her over Rachel. So she's wrong. Ralph does choose Mary. And there's a great scene in the book which I really liked, which is when Rachel discovers this. Rachel walks in on Ralph embracing Mary, and she's obviously shocked and taken aback, but she doesn't show it at all. Instead, she just walks into the room as if nothing was happening, but she sort of gives herself away because she's trying to be really graceful, but her dress, which I would imagine to be like a gown or a really long dress, catches on a chair and sort of drags it along after her, and Rachel is being so controlled, so trying to show that she doesn't care at all, or she hasn't seen what she's seen, that she just keeps going, which is not how a normal person would react in that situation. Normally, someone would go, oh my God, there's a chair caught on me. I'm going to stop and untangle myself. Rachel just keeps going ahead, which I just thought it seemed to me like there's such a natural, that's something that would really happen in real life. It would be almost hard to conceive of that in the sense of fiction, right? I wouldn't be surprised if R. Murray Gilchrist had actually seen that happen and then used it for the story, because it feels so realistic. So continuing with Rachel's narcissism, Rachel tries to kill Ralph when he rejects her. So there are many ways to react to rejection. Most people will not resort to murder in that situation, but Rachel does. And to me, this is an indication of narcissism, because murder is it's an insane length to go to respond. It's an insane way to respond to being rejected. I mean, you see this in very, I think, like tragic situations where, a spouse murders their partner because the partner was going to leave them. And the reason it's quite narcissistic is because, well, first, it's revenge, right? It's not being able to handle rejection or being left or turned down. So really, that response is quite extreme, and it shows that the person has an out of control entitlement in that situation. So we see this with Rachel. So she fails to kill Ralph, even though she tries. And by the way, I should mention, when Rachel tries to kill Ralph, she puts on the gloves of the murderess. She puts on the human skin gloves. So that is such a kind of powerful motif in the story, is these gloves. So when Rachel puts on the gloves, she says something really interesting. So it says, she thrust out both hands to show me that she had donned the skin gloves. Am I attired for tragedy, she cried, or is it because of the devilry in my soul that I desire evil things about me? See, they fit better now. My fingers are swollen, with bitterness if you like. So that's pretty interesting, especially the part about she having devilry in her soul, and that's why she desires evil things about her. So she's kind of reflecting on herself there and saying that she's like an evil person, really. Or perhaps that she acknowledges that there's something wrong with her. Okay, so Rachel tries to kill Ralph. She fails and wounds her sister, which is pretty awful. But even then, she runs away. She has to come back and ruin her sister's wedding, which is so awful. Like, it's such a narcissistic thing to do. You know, she couldn't kill Ralph, but she can at least spoil her sister's happiness forever, and Ralph's happiness too, right? She is not able, she's so selfish, she can't just let them be happy. This is really similar, if you remember, to Barbara Velrest's way of handling things. She had to have the last word. She had to make Ralph do what she wanted. And so really, Rachel is very much her mother's daughter and her heir in how she acts. These are the main points for why I would argue that Rachel is also a narcissist like her mother. On the other hand, I have to say, Rachel at times does seem to care about her sister. So earlier on in the story, we see Barbara being really mean to Mary, which is pretty awful, and Mary being upset, and Rachel comforts her. So Rachel does seem to care about Mary. I don't know whether that quite negates Rachel's later actions at all, but it does seem that there is more of a bond between Mary and Rachel than it might appear later in the story. So maybe I've been a bit too harsh on poor old Rachel. Maybe she wasn't quite so bad. She's pretty awful, but maybe she wasn't that bad. So I hope you enjoyed that, a little bit of psychoanalysis of the characters in this story and some of the themes of murder and betrayal and human skin gloves. How, unheimlich, you could say. Anyway, let me know if you enjoyed that analysis, and I may do more in the future. I don't always have things to say about stories, but if I do, then, and you like this analysis, then I will do more. All right, so that's all for today. Hope you enjoyed the audiobook, and have a good one. See ya.